In this video I will draft a basic bodice block for knitwear, without body shaping darts. This basic construction allows further modeling, for example a t-shirt or tops made from stretch fabric, without darts. Personally, I prefer constructions with darts, because with a larger bust size a pattern with darts works much better. I will come back to this at the end of the video. I start by creating the measurement file with the body measurements needed for this draft. I am using a European size 38, and the draft will be done in centimeters. Here is the list of the measurements used. And this is how you create the measurement file in tape and add the measurements. Next, I open a new pattern file and load the saved measurements from tape. In the next step, I enter the values that are calculated from the body measurements into increments. This way, I can change an addend or case only here if needed, and the calculations will be updated automatically. The ease added for the bust circumference is between 4 and 8 centimeters. In the description, I write down the amount of added ease for each circumference. From point A to point A1, I measure the armhole height. From point A to point A2, I mark the back length. From point A to point A3, I measure the hip height. Find the midpoint between points A3 and A2. This is point A4, the upper hip line. From point A1 to point A5, I measure half of the bust circumference plus the added ease. Next, I mark the intersection points on the center front line, the one with point A5. From point A1 to point A5, I measure half of the back width. Here I made a mistake by marking it from point A5. You can see how I corrected it. Upwards from point A10, I mark point A11 at the intersection with line A, A6. From point A5 to point A1, I measure half of the front width. From point A12, I mark upwards to point A13 at the intersection with line A, A6. I mark point A15 between points A12 and A10. This is the armhole width. From point A to point A15, I measure the neckline width. From point A15, I draw a vertical line upward 2.5 centimeters. This is point A16. I raise the back neckline from point A by 0.5 centimeters and draw the back neckline curve. From point A11, I measure 1 centimeter downward to get point A18. Next, on the line A16-A18, I measure the shoulder length. In the instruction, 1 centimeter should be added to this measurement. I correct it in this step. From point A6 to point A20, I measure the neckline width. From this point A20, I draw a vertical line upward 2 centimeters. This is point A21. From point A21, I draw a line to the left along the center front extension to get point A22. From point A22 to point A23, I measure the neckline depth. I draw the front neckline curve. From point A13, I measure 4.5 centimeters downward to get point A24. From point A21, I draw an arc with the radius equal to the shoulder length plus 1 centimeter. Point A25 is at the intersection of this arc with the axis, at the height of point A24. As you can see, the shoulder lines on the front and back have the same length. Now I will mark points for the armhole. At the midpoint between A18 and A10, I get point A26. From point A12, I measure upward 1/3 of the distance between points A12 and A24. I connect A25, A27, and A14 with a curve for the front armhole. For the back armhole, I connect A14, A26, and A19. I prefer to have a separate curve for the front and back armholes, but of course, you can also draw one curve for both together. Next, I shape the curves. I don't need any extra helper points to draw the right shape, but I want to show you 2 auxiliary points given in the instructions. This may be helpful if you are making your pattern draft on paper. I mark points A32, A33, and A34 on the side seam line. I measure the waist reduction on line A33-A7. This is the pattern width minus half of the final waist measurement. Point A35 is half of this value. In the same way, I measure the hip reduction on line A9-A3. This is the pattern width minus half of the final hip measurement. Point A36 is half of this value. I connect the side seam points with an auxiliary line. Then I smooth them into a curve. In this knit bodice pattern, the side seam is exactly in the middle of the pattern. That's why I simply mirror the side seam points and curves onto the back piece. Using the workpiece tool, I transfer the patterns into details. I add seam allowances. There is no seam allowance on the center front and center back. I want to show you why this pattern is not really suitable for a larger bust measurement. For this purpose, I edit the bust circumference in the measurements. As you can see, the shape of the armhole becomes very disproportionate. Of course, when the change is small, you can reshape the armhole curves. You can also try adjusting the side seam and moving it slightly to the back or to the front. But when the bust circumference is large in proportion to the waist, this does not help. The best solution is to use a bodice pattern with bust darts. Thank you for following along.